Hello, and welcome to the New York Jewish Film Festival. The festival is presented by the Jewish Museum and Film at Lincoln Center. I'm Aviva Weintraub, director of the festival from the Jewish Museum, and I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity today to have a conversation with Katya Ustinova, and she is the director of the fascinating documentary film Shtetlers that's showing in the virtual festival. Welcome, Katya.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of the New York Jewish Film Festival. It's a great honor.
Katya, can we start out by you telling us what was the inspiration for you to make the film?
So it all started with my father, who created the Museum of Jewish History in Russia, in Moscow, back in 2011. And I got really fascinated by the objects that they've been collecting. And together with his team of researchers, they were bringing artifacts from the former, from the outskirts of the former Soviet Union, such as cookware, religious items, I don't know, like pieces of synagogues, like benches from the synagogues, and its unique collection still remains the most authentic exhibit of the Jewish life in Russia. And as we all know, the majority of the American Jews came from the Pale of Settlement between 1900s and mid 1920s. Around 2 million Jews fled the Russian Empire and came and settled down in the United States, and specifically in New York as well.
Great. And how did you have the idea to focus on Ukraine and Moldova? Did you have those in mind when you started?
Yeah, because actually, the very first contacts that were given to me, the very first contacts of the people were given to me by the team, by my father's team, and they were mainly in Ukraine, and actually, the Shtetlers, the Soviet Shtetlers were mainly located in Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. I didn't get a chance to go to Belarus, but I went to Moldova and Ukraine. So I started from these very remote Jewish small towns.
Right. And I have to say, I think you found and you focused on the most fascinating people. Every interview is so moving and each story is very unique. So there are a few that I wanted to ask you specifically about. I think the first one is the couple in central Ukraine, in Shargorod.
Shargorod, yeah.
Thank you. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was the hat making process. You know, to get that kind of detail. You know, for cultural practice and for a very traditional way of hat making that's still being done. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Volodya, the hat maker, was also unique in his way, because he inherited his craft from the Jews, from the shtetl Jews, because they were mainly back in the day, before the war and before the revolution, the Jews in the shtetls were the main engine of trade. So they were tailors, they were shoemakers, they were, I don't know, ice cream and soda makers. So, and that's what Volodya recollects while roaming, while walking down this Jewish street. And he wanted, as what he told me, from being a kid, he wanted to become a tailor. And the only place where you could learn to become a tailor was to learn it from the Jews. So, and it just happened that later he entered this artel, this tailor's artel, which was very popular in Ukraine back in the day, again in the 60s and 70s. And all the Jews were wearing these hats. And that's why the other character, and that's a like a rhyme in the film, that the other character, Slava, who comes from a younger generation, he finds the same kind of hat on the windowsill, which belonged to his father, because back in the day, all Jews wore these very old-fashioned caps or hats, and that's how Volodya learned from the Jews to sew these hats. So, and I found it amazing because he still had these I don't know how they're called, the models, the wooden kind of like models that were given to him by the Jews. So he felt very grateful to them, because that's how he learned his craft. And when I was filming him, the shtetl was almost empty of the Jewish population, and all of his neighbors immigrated either to the West, some went to Australia, some even to Germany, and no one was wearing these hats. They went out of fashion. So there was also one scene that I didn't include in the film, is the scene when in which they're trying to sell these hats in the local market, and no one is buying them, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because the generation was gone. Some people died of old age, some people immigrated, and basically he was making these hats just out of habit, I guess, desperately trying to sell them. But he could also do other things like clothes, and he could sew other things.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a great example of how interconnected the lives were of the Jewish population and the non-Jewish population. And they spoke so eloquently about it themselves. And I think, one of the interesting things about the film in this scene and others was just the glimpses of like everyday life, like the cooking scene. Well, they call it babka. I think we might call it matzah kugel. Right? I'm not sure, but it's one thing to learn about the big historical trends, but when you see what everyday life is like, and also just some of the buildings that you show where Jewish people used to live, it's really it brings it to life in a very real way.
And I believe they're still there, these houses, very badly deteriorated, but some of these houses were like century-old houses. And yeah,
they were what?
Century old.
Oh yes, centuries old. Yeah. Food is such an important culture category. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think that through cooking, this is how the traditions were preserved, and this is how they were passed on from older generations to younger generations. For example, when Sophia, one of the characters, is cooking gefilte fish, the way it was cooked in the shtetls back in the day, she was not allowed to know much about the holidays, but this is how she knew that there was a holiday that they were celebrating, because each food, each preparation referred to a certain holiday, to a certain Jewish holiday. But she was also brought up as a Soviet kid already, even in these small shtetls. They went to Soviet schools. They were not allowed, except for this other character, Emilia, who went to a Yiddish school, which is an exception because Yiddish schools ceased to exist in, I'm not sure about the exact date, sometime in the mid-30s. So, and some Jewish families didn't want their kids to go to the Yiddish schools. These were not Yiddish schools, these were Jewish schools, actually. So they wanted them to get a proper Soviet education, so that after that they could enter and get accepted at the Soviet universities of the Soviet cities.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, the food played a very important role for these kids to learn about the culture and to learn about the holidays. But even years and decades after that, the Ukrainians were cooking gefilte fish in a sock for the weddings, for their weddings. It was an essential part of their celebrations as well, because the cultures were so on the. In regards to the cooking, it was very mixed, because the Jews would eat the Ukrainian borscht, and on the other hand, the Ukrainians would be still cooking this babka.
Right. Yeah, food is definitely something that gets carried with when people immigrate, and it can be very evocative of the culture they left behind, or the people who are gone. The gefilte fish scene, I think that was in Philadelphia, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about the Philadelphia scene?
Yeah, actually, I got acquainted with Sophia through her son. He was a friend of my father, and he owned a restaurant in Moscow, and that's how I met him first. And I started talking that I'm making this film about Jewish shtetls, and he said, "Oh, then you should talk to my mom who lives in Philadelphia. She would tell you everything, and she would cook for you." So and yeah, and that's how I came, and she started cooking, and she's a great cook. And this preparation of gefilte fish took her, I guess, 3.5 hours. Yeah, and you have to like sort of meticulously take out the meat out of the skin, and then sort of reconstruct the fish again. That's how it was served, and in the shtetls.
I think there were many different regional variations for how it's prepared and how it's served.
Absolutely. In some places, like I guess in Moldova, it was more sweet. Right. And in Ukraine, it was less. In Moldova, and I guess in Poland, it was the gefilte fish was more sweet, and in Ukraine, it was more salty.
Right.
But they would always talk about these reconstructed fish. Yeah,
that's very impressive. Very. And
it's very festive. I mean, like when you sort of reconstruct it, and then you can cut it into pieces, and you get the gefilte fish that you could find here in the US in a grocery store.
Yeah, it's not like opening a jar. It's not fast food.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit about the scene in Chernovitz and the people who come to be blessed by the rabbi? That was so interesting.
It's not just blessed. They actually come to him with his troubles, and he writes down all of their troubles, and then he prays for them. But what is fascinating about this scene is that I even got some critique from the Jews in Russia after they watched the film. They said that not all rabbis are as bad as this one, and I said, come on. First of all, this tradition existed for 200 years. The non-Jewish population would go to tzaddiks and rabbis, so the white tzaddiks, the wise men, and it was considered, and this information comes from from the research I was given by my father's researchers from Yiddish studies, actually. So that the non-Jews thought that Jewish God helped better. So they would come to tzaddiks and rabbis to pray for their troubles. And sometimes, even that's what I found in this research, in these studies, they would ask for to jinx someone.
Well, wait, tzaddik actually means righteous, so I don't think they should be in the business of jinxing.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, but I think I just came across this jinxing like episode only once. But yeah, it's amazing that but what is really amazing is that this tradition existed for 200 years, and it was not something extraordinary that he was doing, although he was criticized in Chernovitz as well, because there was another synagogue, the second synagogue in Chernovitz, run by an Israeli rabbi, a modern one, where the Jews who still live in Chernovitz would go. And although Noah's synagogue was very popular in the 60s and in the 70s, when worshiping was sort of oppressed in the Soviet Union, and it was really dangerous for people to go to synagogues, but still there were, in the 70s, as he recalled, they were full of people, especially on holidays. Yeah, some Jewish people criticized his synagogue for being sort of, as one Jewish lady I remember called it, being non-kosher, because of this reception that he used to have. But this is an old tradition, and it existed, yeah, like I said, for 200 years. And the sad thing is that Rabbi Noah passed away, and so there's no longer such thing. And again, I was so fortunate to get a glimpse of that world, and even of that scene. Yeah, because actually, out of 9 characters, I have only 2 who are alive. The rest passed.
Oh, gosh.
The rest of the characters passed away. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was really a last glimpse into this world.
And what was it like as you were traveling around making the film, interviewing people? What was the response to you? I imagine you coming with a film crew. Were people interested in speaking or resistant to speaking?
I was mainly filming by myself.
Okay. A crew of one.
So it always gives you a more kind of intimate access to people and characters. Yeah, but again, the very first contacts were given to me by my father's team of researchers, because that's what they've been doing. In the early 2000s, they were doing their Jewish studies and interviewing these people. That's how I actually learned about these people who were behind these objects that they collected for my father's museum, because they were interviewing these people for their Jewish purposes. But this was, you know, like handheld, like kind of like home video style cameras and very old. So I started filming a decade, even more later, which meant that many more people died, more immigrated, and yeah. But again, I kind of lost my train of thought. You asked me about what? I'm sorry,
Just
I digress sometimes.
no, it's fine. What was the process like as you traveled from town to town?
Yeah, yeah. So the very first contacts were given by my father's team of researchers. So I was welcome there. I mean, like they knew that I come from someone they knew, from someone who interviewed them before that, and
Sure.
I went around, I don't know, maybe 20 small towns in Ukraine, and talked to many more people that you see in the film. I just couldn't include all of these people because I had to focus on certain stories that I wanted to tell, and each character sort of um, serves a purpose, a specific purpose in the film, um, telling specific stories. So, but I always hoped that that the interviews that didn't make it into the film would be a part of my father's interaction screens and a part of the museum.
Mm.
And I really hope that one day they're just working right now on a traveling exhibition, which would include lots of artifacts from the Shtetlers, actually, like parts of synagogue, parts of Jewish houses, and the furniture and things taken from these houses after the Jews left. And they are working on a traveling exhibition. And I hope one day maybe it will come to New York as well. And you will be able to listen to the interviews that didn't make it into the film. But I was always welcome everywhere I went. I didn't experience any anti-Semitism. I don't know why. The people I met in the streets were always very nostalgic with their memories of the life, how they lived next to the Jews, and they really missed them. So I didn't have to, you know, like go and look for these people. Every time I would approach someone and say, because obviously people would ask me, what are you doing in these, you know, like these were very dilapidated towns, and me going, you know, like around with my camera, they would always ask me what this was for. And when I said it was about the Jews, people would very often come up with very, very nice and very nostalgic memories.
Interesting.
So yeah, I just want to add something. If there's on Instagram, there's Shtetlers account where I try to post videos that and excerpts from the either from the film or from or some video bites that didn't make it into the film, and some pieces of animation as well.
Nice.
Because initially we intended to sort of use the animation to describe some of the stories, but later I realized that I cannot do this because I want to have real people talk. And that's why I ended up using the animation in the beginning and in the end, a sort of like introduction and wrap up in the end. But I do have separate short animations. One is about the holes in the matzah, how they were made with the alarm clocks being taken apart.
Right.
So anyone who wants to know more about Soviet shtetls and the life as it used to be, because actually, as I like to say that the majority actually of the American Jews came from these remote places, once came from these places. Around 2 million Jews fled to the United States, and the majority was from the Pale of Settlement, and which includes Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus. So I think they would be excited to find out that the world of their ancestors was still around just until recently. And yeah, I'm trying to post videos on Shtetlers Instagram. Go check for it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Katya. Thank you so much for sharing your film and sharing the stories within the film. And I wish you the very best with the project moving forward.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure, and I'm very excited to be a part of New York Jewish Film Festival.